It's time for the Voice of Reason podcast. Here are your hosts, Sean Phillips, Andy Van Beber, and Travis Kirkendall.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Van Beber. Welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. I am joined by myself. Sean is at the airport getting ready to come home. He wanted to be on tonight's show. We were going to just do a standard recording tonight and then do the broadcast on Thursday. But so those of you who are watching live tonight, we are going to be doing an encore presentation of this on Thursday. So for those of you who are watching us on Thursday, you missed out. But it was my fault because I didn't put all the information on the website, because I just, as an uninformed government teacher, I did not know about the debate tonight. So does that make me a very bad teacher? I think it does, but I'm going to deal with it. So it is what it is. We have all formats running this evening. We have TikTok, we have Facebook, we have Twitch, we have YouTube, all streaming live tonight. And we just want to thank all of our listeners, our normal listeners, for coming on back at our old time. Tuesday night used to be our old time, then Monday night, now we're doing Thursday nights. But we will be doing an encore broadcast on Thursday night. And I would encourage, share with your friends. You say, well, I want to have a good format to watch on. Maybe this won't be it, but if you want to have this playing on your phone while the debate's going on, that's fine. We're going to be going, so the way the format's going to work tonight is we're going to be going back and forth between I'll actually be on the bottom of the screen. I can't show the screen right now because it is, we're going to be tag teaming on with the public broadcast. So it is public domain. So we're not violating TikTok. Please don't ban me. But we are going to be using the public domain live non-debate or what do you want to say? The non-network feed. So that's what we're going to be going on tonight. Low audio. Okay. Tell me how that is. Is that better, Jonathan? Does that sound better like that? Low audio. Am I a little bit louder now? A little bit louder now. Okay. Hopefully that will work and bring us up a little bit. So, anyway, what this debate is going to be looking like. Let's do a live look in on this. The rules for the debate. And I actually just looked these up to have an idea of what the rules are. So, the rules for this debate basically were laid out. It's the same rules that were laid out for the first debate between Biden. I'll turn it up a little bit more, Jonathan. This is this is what was for for Biden and Trump in the first debate. So basically, it's scheduled to start right now. I'm still waiting for the live broadcast. But basically, so this may be according to the Center for Presidential Debates. What this is the Center for Presidential Debates. They're the ones who put this on. They agree to a format. We may be coming on. I'm not sure. But so what they'll have muted. They'll have muted mics. They will go with muted mics, and actually, according to sources, that was actually debated by Trump and Harris wanted to be able to interject whenever she could. They're doing the intro right now. We'll go to it here in a second, but the other thing is it's roughly scheduled for 90 minutes, so we're going to be able to, with the rules that we have within our podcast and within our broadcast window, we are able to go for an hour. Okay, so anything that you have, all those who are following us, like I said, across all of our platforms tonight. Going live on all the platforms. We've got some people. I see we have some people on TikTok. We have some people who are watching on Facebook. We have some people who are watching um, on on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook. So please feel free at any time to get involved on the debate. Get involved with what we're saying. Any comments? It may be a little bit delayed coming in, but I would ask that we're going to try to keep it as civil as we can tonight. But definitely interject your opinions. Donald Trump has been under a lot of fire this week for stuff that he had posted on Truth Social last week. Basically some sexual inappropriate jokes about Kamala Harris. He's also been criticized for making comments about his race, about her race, and everything else like that. And you wouldn't expect anything more. So what they have a timer up right now. It looks like we're going to be counting down the debate. So we've got about 2 minutes before the debate actually starts. We'll do like I said, I will have I'll have the audio going in the background. I may mute it from time to time or turn it down from time to time. But this is obviously going to be pretty interesting. Donald Trump also made comments last week saying that he wanted to bring back public military tribunals to basically try people like Barack Obama and people who haven't been in a while. So they're coming on stage, so we are going to unmute and we are going to go
Welcome
live.
to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid. And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing. And the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because there was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that Xi and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but
so one of the things there that Donald Trump is, you know, when we look at that question, you know, when we look at that question as to how you know, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? And I think that's important. But again,
Donald Trump
Kamala really danced around that issue, and she really didn't answer the question. If you notice that, I may be wrong on that, but she really didn't answer that question as to what's wrong with it. You know, are we better off than what we were 4 years ago? Are we better off? And so she kind of danced around that issue, and Donald basically came out and said, no, this is, it sucks. So let's go back to a little bit more here.
Aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all, in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us, and I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
President Trump will give you a minute here to respond.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before. We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic, and the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died, has there been anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic. We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible. And people give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things, but not enough credit for the great job we did with the pandemic. But the only jobs they got were bounce back jobs. These were jobs bounced back, and it bounced back and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
So Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse, mine would strengthen the economy. What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession. You just have to look at where
so
we
those are again, we mentioned that before on the podcast about the Goldman Sachs comment on how she was she's correct in what she said there. That was a nonpartisan committee that came together and said, look, if you do these tax cuts and if you do these tariff, what you're going to affect the American worker, you're going to affect the economy as a whole. It will create inflation, and again, I'm just quoting about what these guys said, and that you're going to have issues with workers not trying to compete with foreign jobs, okay? And so the demand will be there, but you're going to also have workers who are going to demand more money, which is going to add to the bottom line with inflation, and which will drive prices up. And I think that's where Kamala Harris is coming at with a lot of this.
The Vice President brought up your tariffs, you responded, and let's drill down on this, because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries. And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration. We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country, because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else. The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
Vice President Harris, I do want to ask for your response, and you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having, on the short end of the stick, in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. "Thank you, President Xi," exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals. And that's bad for our economy, too. You know, you mentioned before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane, almost policy that you'd say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lindsay?
I want to.
So when we, my issue with that, with those statements right there, again, and I said that President Johnson, or Speaker of the House Johnson had spoke with President Trump earlier in this week, and he said, hey, be careful about, let's keep it about policy and let's keep it about issues. Let's not get into the whole, what she said, what she did, what they, all of that stuff. You know, one of the things that I really fear about Trump, and one of the reasons why I don't have about Trump, is there's not really any hardcore, I'm pouring facts in here, I'm pouring these things in here, and this is where this is what my data said, and this is what we heard from, and this is what we show. But he's like, well, we probably did this and we probably did that, and we had the best of this and the best of that. Those are, you know, those are subjective terms. Okay? It makes more sense when you go out there and you lay out the absolute, this is what happened, and not speak in terms like this. Let's go back and listen for a little bit more here.
And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions. Very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened. Now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was somewhat liberal, much more liberal than people would have thought. But each individual state is voting. It's the vote of the people now. It's not tied up in the federal government. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact.
Oh, my God.
Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, If Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages. I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Thank you, Vice President Harris.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else, and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states, and the states are voting. And it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart, and they've wanted it back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came
Well,
to
I
your
won't
desk?
have to because, again, two things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote.
Exactly right.
Especially now with the 50-50, and essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up being a total catastrophe. The student loans, and then her, I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach. But look.
So I'm going to cut it off right there because, again, that's not what you need to be focusing on. But and I totally agree with that's one thing that I agree with the president on. And actually, I have a disagreement with my wife and myself have a disagreement on this very topic. But it's not a ban on abortion. I think people have kind of saw what, and he's right. This is what happened within the states. This is what happened when we did it on the national level. We had this nationwide thing. And the way that Roe v. Wade was set up was it basically had the trimester rule. Within the first 3 months, no state government, no local government can do anything to stop an abortion. Okay, 4 through 6 months. Okay, that was left to the states to make whatever protections in place they wanted to put on that, and say, okay, you can do this, 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 and this, but you can't do this, this, and this. Okay, as far as, for example, the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act. Pennsylvania had still has one of the toughest abortion control acts on record. In Pennsylvania, you have to do a 24-hour counseling period where they tell you everything about it, and then you have to go home and think about it, sleep on it. Then you had to, if you were married, you had to get basically the father had to sign off on it. And then you had to, what was the other thing? And anybody under the age of 17 parents had to be notified. And that's just, I'm not saying yes or no to that. I'm just saying that's what Pennsylvania put out there and put in place. Okay. And so Donald Trump was correct in saying this was a thing that was done by the states. This was to give it back to the states. And I think that one of the issues that people have it's a ban on abortion. It's not a ban on abortion. Okay. Now, the part where I disagree with what happens is because there are some states that say, okay, we're going to, in no case are you going to be allowed for abortion, but there's no writing in the books. For example, in the state of Missouri, there's nothing on the books that say, okay, if a woman is having an ectopic pregnancy, if she is bleeding out, if she's doing this, you can't treat her. And I think in these situations, what they're looking at is worst case scenario. I may be wrong, and if you want to chime in on this, please do. I've got the chat box up right now, and I'm looking at it. So if I'm wrong on this, please correct me. But he's saying, let's leave it to the states. And I think Kamala here is going with worst case scenario. Worst case scenario. Now, is Donald Trump way off base when he says, the whole thing, nobody's going to kill. And I applaud the news anchor there who said, you can't, that's murder. That's straight up murder when you kill a baby after it's born. That's murder. That's ridiculous, Donald Trump. And so that's a gaffe on his part, I believe, that for him to be able to say something like that and to make that kind of statement. So, you know, let's look at this. Let's listen to this exchange. This looks like this is interesting.
The 8th month, the 9th
That's
month,
not true.
and probably after birth. Just look at the former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said, we put the baby aside and then we determine what we want to do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so, that would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border?
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go.
Oh,
and
my God.
The people
Here
that
it
do
is.
go, she's
Here it
bussing
is,
them in
folks.
and
Pay
paying them
attention.
to be there.
Pay attention.
And then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest
No, you
rallies,
don't.
the most incredible rallies
You
in the
can't
history of
make that
politics.
statement.
That's because people want to
You
take
can't
their country
make
back.
that
Our
statement.
country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago.
People don't
and
leave my rallies.
What's
They don't
going
leave
on
my
here,
rallies.
you're going to
Let
end
me
up
tell
in
you, they don't
World
leave
War
my
III,
rallies.
just to go into another subject.
Oh, my God.
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in.
Here we
They're
go.
eating the
Here we
cats.
go.
They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's
that true?
happening in
Now
our
we gotta do a
country.
fact
And
check.
it's a
Is that something
shame.
that's actually
As far
true?
as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
television.
television.
But the people
I'm
on television saying their
manager.
dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme.
Shut up.
This is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election, I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a 4-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the Republic, would never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people. Not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people who's were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire him. And you take a guy like Esper. He was no good. I fired him. So he writes a book. Another one writes a book. Because with me, they can write books. With nobody else can they. But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far.
True. That's not true.
In fact, I got more votes than any president, sitting president, in history by far.
That is not true either.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Actual plan. Here we go.
It is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals.
Talk about how you're going to do it.
They allowed
Talk about how you're going to
common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country, and they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow, and I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it. Because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country.
How are you going to do it?
Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof, despite their fraudulent statements that they made. Crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime, and it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse
President
me,
Harris,
the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone
Stop
who has
doing
been
that.
prosecuted
Stop doing that. Answer the question.
for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Agreed.
Excuse me.
Agreed.
Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest
you're
on
not.
appeal.
You're
And
not.
you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases.
One point I do want to make that he's not saying. We had the second Red Scare, McCarthyism. They weaponized against people who were contrary to Joe McCarthy. Just saying.
The documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to
has
try
happened
and win
in
an
this country, just
election.
for
They're
reference.
fake
Happened.
cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people
Vice President
stop
Harris,
him.
thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president,
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head.
Okay. Well, so we're gonna. So that I'll let Trump do his ranting and raving there. That's not going to amount to much. I'm sorry, but part of this discussion is going to be that it's never happened before. It's never happened before. Okay. And Jonathan, I do. Yeah, Cassie says I love that they never address the topic. Yes, that is true. They're not. Neither one. They're both guilty about dancing around the issue. I will go with Kamala on this one though, which she says people are tired of the same old rhetoric, and that the issue isn't going to be addressed. And Jonathan, I agree with you too on the fact that number one, the debate does suck, but number two, this whole if Trump wants to, and I think Trump is about his legacy. Trump is about moving forward. Trump is about moving the country forward, as is Kamala Harris. They're both about moving the country forward, but in different ways. Is he going to play revenge tour? I hope not. I hope not. So let's go back in and see what they're saying here.
Energy, so we reduce our reliance on foreign
Oh, here we go.
oil.
Foreign oil.
We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work, to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name-calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
Here we go.
President Trump, your
Well, first of
response.
all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many
John,
billions.
definitely start that
And
word
when
now.
people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all
she's
that
been
stuff
for that,
up
Donald. Correct it,
very
correct it.
wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
Oh,
She went out.
God. Here it
She
is.
went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish, one thing so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before.
Again, that's not
When they
true.
took over, they
Presidents
got rid
have
of it,
little
started
control
getting
over
rid of
the
it,
oil business,
and
folks.
the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if
Quadrupling
she
and
won the
doubling,
election,
don't-
the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead, we'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out of. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400,
President Trump.
500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that we
for the
have to get
environment.
to.
that
We're
she
out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days.
So, again, and I want to go back to what Cassie commented earlier here on the chat feed. Neither one, okay? You're not going to say, because in that last segment, you didn't see Kamala say once why she's changed her policy. And kudos to President Trump there for addressing, number one, her whole thing on, on fracking oil. Oh, we support the American business, and we're going to. Yeah, she's against that. Okay. the belief that a president is directly related to gas prices. Let's talk about why gas has gone up. Okay, we've had this discussion before, and you can disagree with me if you want to, but the discussion that we've had about this before is because when the price of wages go up, that drives up everything more. Okay, so when you increase wages, your local business is going to do more to cover their costs. They have to raise prices. Okay, so now in order to deliver these goods, so now you have to pay your drivers more. When you pay your drivers more, what does that mean to higher? You've got your operating costs have gone up. Okay, all of that comes back to gasoline. Everything is interdependent upon our society. And so when one thing goes up, you can't just say, well, we're going to let this ride by itself. But again, neither one of these guys, please pay attention to this tonight as we go back here in just a second. But I just want to recognize that nobody, neither one of these, Trump or Kamala Harris, are addressing the issues, and they're stooping to these jab. Okay? Let's go back and listen to a little bit more before we tie it up tonight.
On that day. Yes, sir.
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the president said, the former president said, stand back and stand by. So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was,
He did say that.
I say we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this. You talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border. How come
Okay,
she's not
we're-
doing it?
Obviously,
and I'll
we're
tell
gonna
you
go
what I
back
would
to
do,
that,
and I would be
that
very
rhetoric
proud to.
again. Okay, and one of the things that I want to kind of end up on here is this. Both of these guys, and we don't see this very often. We don't see this where we have I'll take this back. We haven't seen this. We haven't seen a president who didn't serve consecutive terms since it wasn't Taft. It was, I believe it was was it McKinley? No, it wasn't McKinley. It was anyway. It was 1892 and then 1890. He ran. He was a president in 18. It was McKinley. 1892 and 1890 and then 1900. Okay, and so we haven't seen a situation like this where we have a former president and a current sitting vice president who are running against each other. So these guys both have a record. These guys both have a standing and say, we did this, okay? I will agree to the point that some of the stuff was taken out of context. You know, the bloodbath thing was taken out of context because he wasn't talking about, he was talking, like he said, about the energy policy. However, you know, say what you want to say. He was saying, Proud Boys stand by and, you know, stand back and stand by. Okay? How can that be taken? I'm going to, even though I didn't agree with what Donald Trump said on January the 6th when he was there at the Capitol, as a citizen of the United States, he has the right to free speech. Did they go through the proper channels? Yes. Because he did mention, you know, they talked, his committee put together, got the permits to have that rally. They got the permission and the permits from protection of the police to let them march to the Capitol. Okay? Where you cross that line, Cleveland, thank you, President Cleveland. I knew it wasn't McKinley, it was Cleveland. Thank you, Jonathan, on that. But what we've had is, you know, again, not addressing the issues. President Trump is going to have to, in the long run, I'll just back up. In the long run, this isn't going to matter because no matter who you are, you're not going to change anybody's mind about January the 6th. That is a dead issue. I hate to say that because it still burns with me, but January 6th is a dead issue. It's over. It's past. A lot of that stuff that happened, the trials and stuff, he's exactly right. Some of those trials are not going to see the light of day. Okay? And to keep on harping. Oh, here we go. I want to hear this. So he's saying, did he acknowledge that he lost in 2020?
Nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election.
That's great. Okay. So that's old rhetoric. But again, hey, I'm going to tell you folks this. You can, and again, thank you for all who joined us tonight. Again, our thing with Restream, our service only allows us to do up until an hour. So I want to be able to do an encore presentation of this on Friday or on Thursday. But again, folks, do your research. When you're looking at who you're going to vote for president, and I encourage you, if anything else, go out, get out, and do the vote. Go out, get out, and do the vote. Do your research. Go beyond, let's go beyond the tired rhetoric, like she said. Let's go beyond make America great. Let's go on beyond the borders. Let's look at how we are going. Are there plans out there? Okay? Do your research, folks. I thank you so much for joining us live. Continue to watch. This is on YouTube. You can catch us on pretty much any network tonight. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of Reason podcast. Check out our previous shows and clips on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok.